Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to talk today about making things easier when we practice with our children, when we're helping them recite, when we're helping them memorize. Making things easier is something you're going to be hearing probably in just about every video because this is really a fundamental practice that needs to happen in all homes that have children reciting and memorizing the Quran. When you ask a child that has already been memorizing or a child that has been already reading for a little while, when you ask them about something easy, maybe to recite Alif Ba Ta, or if you ask them to just read Surah Al-Ikhlas or Surah Al-Fatiha, they will do it easily, they will do it with joy, they will do it quickly, they won't stumble upon it, and they will say, oh, this was so easy. And when you ask them, was that hard? They will say, oh, no. And some of them might even say, oh, this was like a baby surah, I used to do this when I was so young, and they will be very proud and they're going to feel very accomplished, right? Because it's very, very easy to them. Now, at the same time, you also know that, when a child is just about to start reciting the Quran, when they're just about to, start putting Alif Ba Ta, this is quite hard for them. And so we want to get things to that level of easy, to where they feel accomplished, to where they feel like this is really easy for them. And this is not something, the videos I'm making here, they're not meant for your children, they're meant for you. Sometimes I post clips of my children, that your children might enjoy. But this instruction or this advice that I'm giving here, it's meant for the parents. It's meant for you to sort of internalize that idea. So just because you say something to a child once doesn't mean it's going to stick. And same like with us, with adults, just because we hear something one time, or just even if we know something one time, it doesn't mean it's going to become part of our lives and practice immediately, right? So making things easier, it's going to be that fundamental statement that we're going to be repeating many times in these videos. So what does making things easy mean? It means getting your practice to that level, or that's your goal of your practice, basically. The goal of your practice is not to practice trying hard things, right? Not to learn hard things. That's not the goal of practice. When I say here practice, I mean, this is your daily practice. This is your daily revision or your daily muraja, some of you might call it. But that daily practice of becoming comfortable with the Quran and the recitation and the memorization, the goal of it needs to be making things easier. So sometimes we get carried away. Sometimes if a child is good at memorizing or they memorize a surah quickly, right away we want to move on to the next thing. And there's a lot of pressure to complete the Quran in a certain time frame, which I, by the way, absolutely don't agree with. So there is no pressure, there is lots of time. And so the goal of the practice is to make things easier. So to repeat them that many times that the child is absolutely confident and it's actually easy for them. The reason why they start avoiding the muraja, why they start avoiding the practice, is because it's just too hard. They're struggling with something. And so the goal of practice, why do we practice? We practice to make things easier. And so this is something you can keep reminding yourself every time. So if your child has mastered a surah and it's super easy and they can do it with no mistakes, and it's just really, they're very, very confident, only then it is that you move on to something else, and then you practice that else, whichever that might be. I'm not giving you specific instructions here because your child might be at different levels, but basically at any point the goal of the practice is to make things easier, to keep reciting, to keep practicing until things are easy. Now, if your child is having a hard time with something, that means, okay, you need to stick around here. You need to figure out, what's going on here. This might be pronunciation of something. This might be a particular tajweed rule. This might be a particular ayah that's really tough and it requires more work. And that's okay, because if they're struggling with it, that's your sign that something is not working. So the pressure is not to just kind of blame them, because this is often what we do, right? We say they're lazy, we say they're not focused, we say they don't want to do it, we say they are fighting with us. Some of us might say, oh my God, they're disrespectful, they don't want to listen to the teacher. But the goal here is to come alongside a child and help them figure out, okay, they're struggling with this, so that means they need more time. The goal of the practice is to make things easier. Now, a big problem here is sometimes behavior that's difficult to separate from the actual lesson, right? So you might have a lesson that you're trying to do. This might be a particular tajweed rule. This might be the qaida nuraniya that you're trying to do, or, reading out the words. But then your child is not cooperative. Then your child is rolling their eyes at you. Your child is running around the room. If you're trying to, get a child to recite something and your child is running around the room and you can't get them to sit still, that's your sign that the behavioral stuff needs to be fixed first. And so what does that mean when I say behavioral stuff fixed first? That means we need to pay attention. Is this child even capable of, the lesson that we're trying to teach him or her? So if a child is having a difficulty sitting still, for example, then we need to practice that, okay? If a child is having a difficulty following instructions, then we need to practice that until that it's easy. How do we practice following directions? We can tell the child, can you jump up and down? And they keep jumping up and down. Then you tell them, can you wiggle your right toe? And then they wiggle their right toe. And don't assume that this is easy for every child. So you want to first practice following directions. You want to practice sitting still. You want to practice, sitting with the mushaf, opening the mushaf a certain way, figuring out your spot where you're going to practice. Practicing listening to the Quran. So those are all behaviors that need to come together in order to make practice easier. So, often we expect the child to just, sit and memorize or sit and read. But meanwhile, they're having hard time with all these other behaviors that come with it. And then, we get mad at them. We're upset that this is not working and we're wondering where we're going wrong. So we need to take a step back and take a look, where is this child struggling and what is going on? Often a parent will comment, my child is just lazy, they don't want to put in the effort. Okay, so that's then your focus. Why are they not putting in the effort? What does putting effort look like for you? And are they even capable of that? Sometimes we say focus and pay attention. Those are empty words to a child. What does focus mean? What does, when you say to a 5-year-old or 7, 8-year-old, even 10-year-old, when you say focus and pay attention, what does that mean? Those are just empty words for them. So you have to first identify for yourself. What does that mean for you? What does focus look like? What kind of actions do you want to see? Do you want to see a child that's sitting still? Then you might remind them to say, sit still. What does focus look like? Does focus look like holding the mushaf, maybe following with their finger along the lines? Paying attention to your words, making eye contact with you. What does focus look like? Define it. And a lot of children have very short attention spans. And so, again, when we say pay attention, you're just lazy, you're being distracted, those are all very negative connotations and they make our children feel bad. And when we feel bad, we're not primed for learning. We put on armor and shields, we don't want to interact. We're just, then we develop this attitude of, I don't care. I'm not even interested, and some of the children, and particularly older children, they just might, turn off. They're not even paying attention to you anymore. So really be careful here. How are we interacting with our children? What kind of expectations we're putting on them? So if you're having a hard time with behavioral stuff, that you think this is difficult, pay attention to that. Pay attention to behaviors that irritate you. And this sounds a little bit selfish, right? Like I'm telling you, pay attention to what irritates you. This is actually not about being parent-centered, but it actually helps your child in the long run. So because if you're irritated with the child, most definitely the child will be able to feel that irritation and they will start feeling bad because like we said in the previous videos, their goal is just to, gain their parents' love and affection. So if they feel that you're irritated by them and they don't even know what they did wrong, they don't even know, what kind of mistake they made, they're just going to end up feeling bad about themselves. Okay, so pay attention to what kind of behaviors irritate you. Maybe they are wiggling too much, right? Maybe you don't like that. Maybe they are not flipping the pages carefully. Maybe they're ripping the pages, right? Or maybe they are, interrupting constantly with some story or the other. So those are then all things that you have to decide 2 things about them. You can decide to ignore a behavior. You can just kind of say, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to that. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to, move on. Okay, so what if they're wiggly a little bit? It doesn't bother me too much. It's okay. I can just ignore it and hopefully they'll stop. Or you can choose to practice the preferred behavior. So you can tell your child, okay, why don't you try sitting like this? Or why don't you try holding the mushaf like this? Or, why don't we get a little table for you? And so you then focus on the preferred behavior. But then you have to clarify for yourself, what exactly am I looking to see here? What will not irritate me? And so the clearer you get on your expectations, what it is that you want, And if there is a big gap between your expectation and what the child is doing, then you need to take a break and you need to evaluate, okay, is this child even ready for this? So often we say, but that child knows what they're supposed to do. Just because they know doesn't mean they're capable to do it on demand. And, so you kind of need to step back. I think there was a question on one of the previous videos where the father was saying, the child is not pronouncing letters and words clearly. But she can do it for a little while, but then she loses focus. Okay, so maybe then we need to readjust. What is it that she can do? Maybe the lessons are too long. What does pronouncing clearly mean? Does the child even understand when you say, I used to tell my children often, recite slower. That was very vague to them. What does that mean? So they would recite and, I would just kind of say, okay, take it down a notch. What does that mean? Slow down, right? So you have to be very specific in your instructions because often our instruction doesn't mean much. We're just using empty words. So we have to be very clear in what we're expecting from our children in order to make the practice more productive. And so when you focus on these behaviors around the practice that are irritating you, if you focus on teaching your child how to follow these things, it might seem like it's slow. It might seem like, okay, but look, we're not even doing Quran here. Trust me, in the long run, this type of cooperation and developing this type of relationship will help you establish the practice and the reading of the Quran as something joyful, as something meaningful, as something pleasant, rather than something that's a battleground, something that, we're all annoyed with each other. Okay, so I want you to think of this concept of making things easier and then looking at the behavioral difficulties or things that might irritate you and practicing those things, in little chunks, and then saying, okay, we're going to practice sitting still if that's something that's required. We're going to practice pronouncing these letters. And sometimes we assume just because a child knows how to say alif ba ta that that it's very translatable to other activities they might be doing in the Quran. So take it easy. If your child is trying to put your first surah together, often, if they're, for example, reciting, listening to a recitation of a particular reciter, they will try to mimic their voices. And sometimes, then they will mess up some tajweed rules, and it will sound like they're trying to sing it. And so maybe that's irritating to you. And then you're trying to tell your child, but don't sound like this, or you're trying to make them sound more like the reciter. And those are all vague instructions. So the goal of the practice is to keep things easier. And the only way things get easier if we keep repeating them in a pleasant way until we really get them. So this might be just an ayah, and so don't be disappointed if you're on an ayah for a very, very long time, or if you're just doing one particular letter for a really long time. And sometimes I see it, for example, with my daughters, we've covered the qaida numerous times, we've done it all, and then sometimes they still look at the letter and they don't know which one it is. So which means we keep practicing until it gets easier, because every time adding easier to easier, it still work, right? Adding easy things to easy things, it still requires practice, but it's much easier than just adding challenging things to challenging things, because then it's just that load gets too heavy and we just don't want to do it. Like, this is in human nature. When something is too hard, when it's something out of our comfort zone, we just don't want to do it. So we want to kind of get into that flow where things are enjoyable, where the kids feel proud of themselves for doing the things, when it's very easy for them. And so this is where I want you to keep paying attention to, rather than being frustrated. Where else can you find your frustration? You can find it when you say to yourself, but a child should be able to, when you start with the shoulds. This is quite dangerous, but when you sort of assume that the child is doing this on purpose, that they're refusing it on purpose, like you're assigning intent to them, you're thinking they're doing it on purpose to make you miserable. And this is usually, we will assign something negative. We will say, well, they're lazy, or they're just not careful, or they're just rushing through the recitation and things like that. And so be very careful about that. Like, we want to, because when we kind of approach it like that, well, he should be able to do that. If they're not doing it, there is a reason for that. And, we need to back off a little bit. And again, I think there's a lot of this pressure in the Muslim community to complete things on time, to just get it done. But I think, it's just, there is no rush. If you make the recitation practice pleasant enough, you will enjoy it, inshallah, for many years to come. So focus on keeping things easier, inshallah. I hope this helps, inshallah, and I'll talk to you soon. And next time we'll talk about focus. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.